Are you struggling to differentiate complex post-traumatic stress disorder from simple PTSD? Welcome to the group. It is not easy. As the name suggests, complex PTSD is not simple. In this video, I will explain to you how to differentiate between PTSD and CPTSD. The answer lies in the term disturbances in self-organization, or DSO, as defined in ICD-11. My name is Gunjan Trivedi, and I'll take you through nuances that can help you understand the difference between simple and complex PTSD. Watch out, don't shoot the messenger. As I have highlighted, there is complexity in breaking down the complex PTSD. And why do I understand that? Because over last several years, over hundreds of assessments, initially I started with assessing the DSM-based PTSD. That is the first point. When I did that, we got improvements. The components of re-experience, sense of threat, avoidance went down, flashbacks decreased. However, the second point, the scores of depression did not go down as consistently as I would have expected. And also, there were tendencies for people to remain in that negative mindset. I'm talking simple English, not technical terms. So the mood did not go down, the emotional regulation remained a challenge, and the negativity about the individual being responsible and not able to do anything in life continued. This led to exploring the research which started in 2018, where we started looking around for what is it that has something unique that PTSD doesn't have, and therefore the term complex PTSD came. In another video I talk about the components. However, today I'll focus solely on the differentiator that helps us understand what is unique in CPTSD that does not exist in PTSD. For whatever good reasons, luck and divine intervention, when I started working on this complex PTSD, we had years of experience understanding childhood trauma, and that came in very handy. Note this down. Childhood trauma of repeated nature happening to a child is one of the differentiators between PTSD and CPTSD as a risk factor, not a cause. So, as I highlighted in ICD-11, the key term that is highlighted is DSO. So, a little bit of background first. Complex PTSD has two broad constructs or structure. PTSD as defined in the DSM-5 and DSO, which is unique in ICD-11, that does not exist in that form in ICD-10 or DSM-5. And you can see on the screen the DSO has three components. On the left are technical terms used in ICD-11 or the construct of CPTSD DSO. On the right are simpler descriptions, and I'm going to cover them. The first component of DSO is difficulties in emotional regulation. Usually, this is more of depressive tendencies, feeling hopelessness, and negativity in managing emotions. This is one component. Second, which is a very interesting concept, where there is a complete inconsistency or convoluted relationship with who the individual is. So the relationship with self is toxic shame, extreme form of self-esteem loss are very common in this component. And finally, the impact of this on relationships or social context. So emotional regulation challenges, concept of self is convoluted, and social context or social anxiety, relationship issues are very common. These three components differentiate simple PTSD from CPTSD, and we will delve into some more details on the components. Before we continue further, I want to highlight, I know it's a cliche, however, it's important to recognize the difference between toxic shame or shame and guilt. A lot of theoretical constructs over the last few decades have defined or articulated them. When the focus is on what I did that was not right, it brings regret or guilt, and that action-focused understanding of negative emotion brings better outcomes. However, in shame, the focus is not on the task but on the individual, and therefore I am the bad person. I am the problem, not what I did. And when this continues and becomes the second nature of the person, it is called toxic shame. And this is a component that is present in DSO. In DSO, these components are very unique, and please note that we are attempting to understand these components in the human experience, and that is not easy to structure, construct around. And that's when International Trauma Questionnaire has done a fantastic job of putting 2 questions each on these 3 components of disturbance in self-organization. And if you are a practitioner, when you go through these questions, and I'm going to put it on the screen at this point. So now on the screen, you see the structure of DSO and the questionnaire. The affective dysregulation is covered by question 1 and 2. The negative self-concept is covered by question 3 and 4. And you can see as the questions are structured, they clearly help you understand whether the presence of convoluted concept of self exists or not. And finally, disturbance in relationship is where there are 2 questions. So please note that converting the human experience into a construct of a survey is not easy. And International Trauma Questionnaire has done a fantastic job of doing that. And we've done several hundreds of those assessments. So I talk from personal experience. So to summarize, these 6 questions, and there are 3 more connected. However, they are not part of the DSO score in ITQ. So I'm skipping those. However, you can look at the whole ITQ questionnaire. So DSO is a major differentiator between complex PTSD and CPTSD. Now, summarizing this in simple English, individuals who go through repeated exposure to trauma during childhood with high intensity trauma have a very different outcome, which is focused on how the individual experiences emotions, how the individual thinks about himself and herself, and how this individual manifests different relationships in his or her life. And these 3 things are at the core of what differentiates CPTSD from PTSD. These are great theoretical ideas, and anyone can do that. What I will do now is to go into the details of what we discovered when we assessed people using quantitative approach. So the point number 1, as I highlighted, DSO is a key differentiator between PTSD and CPTSD. And you can see it now on the screen that the DSO score for individuals with complex PTSD is far higher, almost twice compared to those who have PTSD. Ignore those who have none of these 2 for now. Just comparing PTSD versus CPTSD, you'll see a huge increase in DSO scores on the questions that I shared earlier. Second point, where we go into a specific construct, which is concept of self. Here, or negative self-concept, questions 3 and 4 as shared earlier. If you look at the visual on your screen, you will see that 4 having extreme negative concept and 0 has none. You will see that CPTSD assessed individuals have a very high score on both of these questions, 3 and 4, compared to even PTSD. So what I shared as construct defined in ICD-11 are not only conceptual, they can be assessed based on our several hundreds of assessments. To summarize, DSO score is far higher, and DSO covers those 3 important structure or concepts that you see now on the screen. Repeating those 3 constructs, which is affect dysregulation, emotional regulation issues, second, the negative self-concept, or how I think about myself, and finally, disturbance in relationship and social context. This is the difference that separates CPTSD from PTSD. Now that we have covered empirical data demonstrating how DSO and its subcomponents differentiate CPTSD from PTSD, it will be interesting to understand what causes it, because end of the day, understanding the breakdown and the scores is just a good thing to know. We need to look back at why some people end up with high DSO score, why some individuals end up with high scores on question 3 and 4, or the whole concept of self, is important. And now you'll see on the screen what we have understood so far based on our hundreds of assessments about the risk factors, not the causal factors, the risk factors which increase the risk. As the visual shows, you will note individuals exposed to trauma during childhood, specifically emotional abuse, emotional neglect, and peer isolation. Now note these three components. When me as a child experiences emotional abuse, it's all targeting me. The self-concept gets convoluted. Hopefully you understand. It also creates a very big confusion in the child's mind about emotions, because the child understands what is coming is not really consistent with what I have done or I may have done. So that starts to create a confusion, and that obviously creates a perception that people around me are scary, fearful, and I am the problem, toxic shame. So these three components are primary contributors or risk factors that may increase the risk for long-term adult CPTSD or high DSO score. In addition, you will see that high levels of depression is a common measured outcome or end process measure, along with high levels of loneliness. So these two components much higher than those in PTSD. So I'm talking about this as significant difference between PTSD versus CPTSD. And finally, the presence of the PTSD components. The PTSD components include the experience, sense of threat, and avoidance with respect to event are also present when we have a CPTSD assessment. So the buckets of PTSD, CPTSD components, as well as the presence of childhood trauma, specific components that I shared earlier, high levels of depression, as well as the feeling of psychological loneliness are common risk factors. And you will see more on this because we have some interesting results which I am yet not able to share because that's work in progress. So I will come back and share those specific details with you. Note this down. If you are a parent, please understand, and if this has happened, you can sort it out through therapeutic intervention. If you are a caregiver, please watch out for this, whether you have intended or not. It's the perception that matters for the child. And if you are a teacher, be very careful of maintaining the healthy balance, and more specifically, provide social support. Make sure the child or individual does not feel lonely, and finally, work to understand and create a culture, that environment that provides the framework for child to not continue the after effects of such experience if these experiences have happened. To summarize, DSO and PTSD are core components of CPTSD, and DSO is what separates PTSD from CPTSD. DSO includes three core pillars: affect dysregulation, negative self-concept, and disturbance in relationships, as you can see on the screen. And finally, DSO individuals are linked in terms of risk factors to high levels of depression, feeling of loneliness, strong repeated history of exposure to childhood emotional abuse and neglect, and or peer isolation, and also presence of PTSD components. This is how we differentiate. These are based on ICD-11 structure and our empirical evidence. If there are any thoughts or suggestions or questions, or you have a different perspective, I would love to learn about that. And please put them in the comments. And if you like the video, please continue sharing, because many people, unlike what I thought, carry these symptoms in their mind and in their life, and it can be addressed. And that's another project we're working on, and we'll come back to you on that as well.